If you have ever had an entitled rich kid laugh at your state school degree, stay right here. This guy mocked my education in front of the entire executive team, then found out I secretly owned the patent behind the flagship product he had built his whole future on. He thought his last name protected him, but by the time the lawyers finished reading my claims, his own father was asking me what it would cost to keep his company alive. My name is Ivy Flores, and for the last 38 years of my life, I have learned that silence is usually the loudest sound in the room right before everything falls apart. I was sitting in the executive boardroom of Novastride Dynamics, a space designed to intimidate. The table was a slab of polished black walnut that cost more than my first car. And the floor-to-ceiling glass walls looked out over the gray industrial sprawl of the city. It was the kind of room where careers were made, or in my case, quietly dismantled by a man wearing a suit that cost $3,000 and a smile that cost his father significantly more. I kept my hands folded on top of my notebook, pressing my thumbs together until the knuckles turned white. At the head of the table stood Evan Hale. He had been our head of innovation for exactly 6 weeks, a title created specifically for him by the man sitting to my right, CEO Gregory Hale. Evan was young, with the kind of shiny, well-fed confidence that only comes from never having heard the word no in a meaningful way. He was pacing back and forth in front of the projection screen, clicking through slides that looked suspiciously familiar. The product he was pitching was called PulseGuard. It was a smart wearable device for industrial safety, designed to detect microtremors and fatigue in heavy machinery operators before accidents happened. It was brilliant. It was elegant. And every single piece of data on the screen, every stress test model, every underlying algorithm belonged to me. I watched as Evan pointed a laser at a graph showing energy dissipation rates. That was my graph. I had generated it 3 years ago on a laptop that overheated if I ran too many simulations at once. I remembered the smell of burning dust and stale coffee from the nights I spent refining that curve. "This is not just a step forward," Evan announced, his voice booming with theatrical projection. "This is a quantum leap. PulseGuard is the flagship that takes Novastride public. We are talking about a total addressable market in the 9 figures. The investors are already circling. Gentlemen, they smell blood in the water, and for the first time, we are the sharks." The executives around the table nodded. They were mesmerized by the buzzwords, by the glossy renderings of the device, by the sheer momentum of Evan's performance. He was selling them a dream. I was the only one in the room who knew the dream had a structural flaw. I cleared my throat. It was a small sound, but in the acoustic perfection of the boardroom, it cut through Evan's monologue like a dropped glass. Evan stopped and turned to me, his smile tight. He looked at me the way one looks at a malfunctioning printer. "Yes." "Ivy, did you have something to add?" I sat up straighter, adjusting my glasses. I tried to keep my voice level, stripping it of the frustration that was boiling in my gut. The presentation is impressive. Evan, however, looking at the prototype specs on slide 12, I have a concern about the polymer stability under extreme thermal cycling. If we use the standard casing shown there, the sensor array is going to drift after 48 hours of continuous use. It creates a false negative safety rating. The room went silent. This was a technical review. Technically, I was the senior materials engineer. It was literally my job to point out failure points. But the air in the room shifted. I had interrupted the coronation. Evan let out a short, sharp laugh, shaking his head as he looked at the other executives. He leaned back against the heavy wooden table, crossing his arms. "See, this is what I love about Ivy, always in the weeds." He pushed off the table and walked toward me, stopping just inside my personal space. "Look, I appreciate the concern. I really do. But you have to stop thinking like a lab tech and start thinking like a visionary. The stability issue is a theoretical constraint. In the real world, we iterate. It is not theoretical," I said, my voice hardening slightly. "I ran those impact simulations myself. If that polymer degrades, people get hurt. The liability alone would." Evan cut me off. Raising a hand, "Ivy, please, this is the problem with hiring from the academic minor leagues. He turned his back to me, addressing the room at large. Theory people from Midwest State do not always understand real-world execution like Ivy League MBAs do. We do not let perfect be the enemy of profitable. A ripple of awkward laughter moved through the room. It was not genuine amusement. It was the sound of subordinates aligning themselves with power. They were laughing because the CEO's son was laughing. I felt the heat climb up my neck. Midwest State. He threw the name of my university out like it was a punchline. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was painting me as the plodding, unimaginative provincial, and himself as the enlightened genius. Evan turned back to me, the smirk now fully fixed on his face. He winked. Don't worry. Ivy, we need people who can write documentation too. Someone has to file the paperwork while the rest of us change the industry. I sat there, my pulse pounding in my ears. The disrespect was so casual, so practiced. He had taken my work, stripped my name from it, and was now using it to bludgeon me into submission. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to scream that the vision he was selling was built on my sleepless nights, my spilled coffee, my obsession with adaptive polymer lattices, but I did not. I swallowed the anger, forcing it down into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I kept my face neutral, a mask of professional indifference. CEO Gregory Hale cleared his throat. He had been watching the exchange with a look of paternal pride. He did not see a senior engineer being humiliated. He saw his son asserting dominance. Great presentation, Evan, Gregory said, tapping his pen on the table. Truly inspiring work. I think we have a winner here. Gregory turned his gaze to me. His eyes were dismissive, glossing over me as if I were part of the furniture. Ivy, give Evan whatever technical support he needs to get this across the finish line. We need to move fast. Let's make sure he has the resources to execute his vision. His vision. The words tasted like ash. Understood. I said quietly. The meeting broke up a few minutes later. Handshakes were exchanged. Backs were slapped. Evan was the center of gravity, soaking up the praise. I gathered my notebook and my pen, feeling very small and very tired. I walked out into the hallway, intending to head straight for the elevators. But Evan was waiting for me. He was leaning against the wall, checking messages on his phone. When he saw me, he slid the phone into his pocket and blocked my path. You know, Ivy, he said, his voice low and smooth, lacking the theatrical projection he had used in the boardroom. You really should learn to read the room. That little outburst in there, not a good look. I am responsible for the integrity of the product. Evan, I said, refusing to look away. If it fails on my watch. He stepped closer, dropping the pretense of professional advice. His cologne was expensive and cloying. It's not your watch anymore. It is my watch. You are just here to keep the lights on. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that was meant only for me. Honestly, if you wanted a real career where people actually listened to you, you should have gone to a real school instead of that coupon book college you scraped your degree from. You are out of your depth. Ivy, go back to your lab. He patted me on the shoulder 2 condescending taps and then turned and walked away, whistling as he headed toward his corner office. I stood there in the hallway for a long moment. The humiliation washed over me, hot and suffocating. He thought I was weak. He thought that because I did not scream, I did not have teeth. He thought my degree, paid for with double shifts and loans I was still servicing, made me lesser. I turned and walked toward the engineering wing. My heels clicked a steady rhythm on the linoleum floor. By the time I reached the heavy security doors of my lab, the heat of the shame had evaporated, replaced by a dangerous, icy calm. I swiped my badge and entered the lab. It was quiet here. The hum of the servers and the low drone of the ventilation system were the only sounds. This was my domain. This was where the work happened. I walked over to my desk, ignoring the blinking light on my office phone. I sat down and unlocked the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. It was a heavy steel drawer that stuck a little when you pulled it. Inside, buried beneath manuals and old performance reviews, was a manila folder. It was worn at the edges, the paper soft from years of being handled. I pulled it out and set it on the desk. The label on the tab was handwritten in my own neat, precise script: Flores Patent Family. Active. I opened the folder. The documents inside were crisp. The dates, the claims, the abstract, it was all there. I ran my finger over the stamped seal of the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Evan Hale thought he was building a 9-figure future. He thought he was standing on a podium. He did not realize he was standing on a trapdoor. And as I looked at the patent number that formed the mathematical heart of PulseGuard, I realized that I was the only one holding the lever. Evan called it a coupon book college. He said it with the sneering confidence of a man who had never had to choose between buying textbooks or buying groceries. What he did not understand was that when you attend a state school on a scholarship that covers only 60% of your tuition, you learn to hustle in ways that an Ivy League syllabus never teaches. I was a first-generation college student. My father was a mechanic and my mother cleaned houses, and neither of them finished high school. When I got into Midwest State University, it felt like we had won the lottery, even if I spent the next 6 years working the graveyard shift at a 24-hour diner to make ends meet. I smelled like stale coffee and grease for the better part of a decade, while Evan Hale was likely spending his weekends skiing in Aspen or networking at mixers that cost $500 a plate. I was in a basement lab at 3 in the morning, running polymer simulations on a secondhand desktop that sounded like a jet engine. That grit is exactly how I stumbled upon the breakthrough. I was in the second year of my master's program, funded by a grant I had fought tooth and nail to secure. My research focused on adaptive polymer lattices materials that could change their molecular structure in response to kinetic impact. The goal was to create something soft enough to wear, but hard enough to stop a hammer blow. For 6 months, every mixture failed. They were too brittle, too heavy, or too expensive to manufacture. Then, one Tuesday night in November, I made a mistake in the curing process. I let the temperature drop 3 degrees lower than the protocol demanded. When I came back the next morning, the sample wasn't ruined. It was perfect. I tested it. I hit it with a sledgehammer. The material didn't crack. It dispersed the energy so efficiently that the sensor below it barely registered the impact. It was a self-adjusting impact absorption matrix. It was the holy grail of safety materials. My faculty advisor, a man who had not set foot in a real lab in 10 years, immediately wanted to publish. He saw a prestigious journal article with his name listed first. I saw something else. I saw the rent my parents struggled to pay. I saw the student loans hanging over my head. I saw ownership. I told him the data wasn't ready. I stalled, and while he waited for a draft that never came, I drained my meager savings account. I had $4,000 to my name, money I had scraped together from tips and tax returns. I took every cent of it to a small intellectual property law clinic 2 towns over. The lawyer was a young guy working out of a strip mall, but he was sharp. We filed a provisional patent in my name only. A year later, right before I graduated, we converted it to a full utility patent. I ate instant noodles for 8 months to pay the legal fees. I wore shoes with holes in the soles, but I owned it. The Flores matrix was mine. 2 years later, Nova Stride Dynamics came knocking. They didn't recruit me because of my school pedigree. They recruited me because they had read my master's thesis, the sanitized version I eventually published, and they needed someone who understood non-Newtonian polymers. I remember the hiring process vividly. The human resources manager was a woman named Linda who smiled too much. She slid an offer letter across the desk that included a standard intellectual property assignment clause. It said, in dense legal text, that anything I invented, thought of, or looked at while employed by NovaStride would belong to them. Most people just sign. They see the salary, the health insurance, the promise of a steady life, and they sign. I did not. I took the contract home. I circled the IP clause in red ink. I wrote an addendum. I called it Exhibit A. It was a carve-out list, detailing exactly what I owned before walking through their doors. I listed my patent number. I listed the underlying research. I included a clause stating that any future work substantially derived from this pre-existing intellectual property would remain the property of Ivy Flores unless a separate licensing agreement was signed. When I brought it back, Linda frowned. She said it was irregular. She said legal would have to review it. But Novastride was in a bind. They had just lost their lead materials engineer, and Gregory Hale was desperate to start a new safety division. He was in a rush. I remember him walking into the HR office, checking his watch, and asking what the holdup was. "She wants an IP carve-out for some grad school project," Linda had said, dismissing it with a wave of her hand. Gregory didn't even read it. He just wanted the seat filled. "Just sign it," he had snapped. "We are not interested in her homework. We need her on the line by Monday." He signed his name right next to mine. Gregory Hale, CEO. He signed away the rights to the technology that would one day save his company, and he did it because he couldn't be bothered to read 3 paragraphs of text from a state school graduate. That was 5 years ago. For 5 years. I was the backbone of Novastride. I was the one who figured out how to stabilize the chemical mixture for mass production. I was the one who stayed late to debug the manufacturing line when the extruders kept jamming. When Evan joined the company, fresh off a mediocre consulting stint that his father had likely paid for, he was installed as the head of innovation. Evan didn't know a polymer from a polyester blend. He was an idea guy, which meant he threw out buzzwords and expected other people to make them physically possible. I watched him rise. I watched him take the credit for the shock absorption helmet line I designed. I stood in the back of the room while he accepted an industry award for the Hale Safety Protocol, which was just a rebranding of my standard operating procedures. He treated me like a mechanic. To him, I was the invisible technician, the person you call when the printer breaks or the science gets too hard. He stopped inviting me to high-level strategy meetings. He started referring to my team as support staff. I stopped fighting for credit 3 years ago. I realized it was a losing battle. HR ignored my complaints about Evan's hostility, labeling it as a personality clash. So, I went quiet. But I never stopped filing. Every time Evan sent me an email asking me to fix the matrix thing, I saved it. Every time I uploaded a new iteration of the lattice design to the central server, I kept a localized copy with the metadata intact. I kept my original lab notebooks in a fireproof safe at home. I had a digital paper trail that documented every single step of PulseGuard's evolution, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the product was not an innovation Evan dreamed up, but a direct application of the patent I listed in Exhibit A. I tolerated the disrespect because I loved the work, I loved the science, and truthfully, I liked the steady paycheck. I had convinced myself that being the quiet, essential engineer was enough, but the boardroom changed everything. When Evan stood there and mocked my education, when he weaponized my background to make a room full of rich men laugh at me, he flipped a switch. It wasn't just an insult to my pride. It was a violation of the unspoken contract of labor. I had given them my skill, my time, and my loyalty. In return, they were supposed to give me a livelihood. Instead, they were trying to erase me. He had crossed the line, and more importantly, he had formally presented a product that infringed on 13 separate claims of my patent. I sat at my desk in the lab, the hum of the servers surrounding me like a protective shield. I pulled the original employment contract out of the folder. The paper was 5 years old, slightly yellowed at the edges. I smoothed it out next to the patent certificate. I looked at the dates. My patent was granted 2 years before my start date. I looked at the carve-out, Exhibit A, clearly referenced in the main body of the contract. I looked at the signatures. Ivy Flores, Gregory Hale. The alignment was perfect. Evan thought I was a tedious employee who needed to learn her place. He thought I was just a cog in the machine he would inherit. He didn't realize that I wasn't the cog. I was the engine, and I held the keys. I ran my thumb over Gregory's signature. They had forgotten to read the one thing that mattered. They assumed that because they paid me a salary, they owned my brain. They were about to learn an expensive lesson in intellectual property law. I took a deep breath, feeling the dangerous calm settle over me again. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to make a scene in the hallway. I was going to let Evan launch his flagship product. I was going to let him stake his entire reputation on it. I was going to let the stock price climb on the rumors of this revolutionary technology, and then, when they were at the very top of the mountain, I was going to remind them who owned the ground they were standing on. The digital footprint of a lie is often harder to erase than the lie itself. Evan Hale might have had the boardroom, the glossy suits, and the family name, but he did not understand the architecture of the network he was trying to command. I did, the day after the boardroom ambush. I sat at my workstation, the glow of 3 monitors illuminating the dark corner of the lab. I logged into the central project repository for PulseGuard. Usually, my credentials gave me root access to everything design files, material specs, raw data logs. I was the architect, after all, but when I clicked on the folder labeled Phase 3 Prototypes, the screen flashed a gray box I had never seen before. Access denied, view only permission. My stomach tightened. It was a small change, a digital slap on the wrist. I tried the folder for investor decks. Same result. I tried financial projections. Locked entirely. Evan was scrubbing me out of the system. He needed my data, so he could not lock me out completely, but he was turning me into a spectator in my own laboratory. I could look, but I could not touch. I could not edit. I could not leave a mark. I navigated to the shared drive, digging into the backup archives that the IT department rarely scrubbed. If Evan was using my work, he had to have pulled the files from somewhere. It took me 20 minutes to find it. Buried in a subdirectory named Concept Assets, I found a PDF file titled Hale Vision Draft 1. I opened it. The air in the lab felt suddenly thin. It was my master's thesis. It was not even a subtle plagiarism. He had taken the digital file of the thesis I wrote at Midwest State, the one that detailed the foundational math of the adaptive lattice. He had cropped the top 2 inches off the title page, the part that said, by Ivy Flores, candidate for Master of Science, and slapped the NovaStride logo over the gap. He had not even bothered to reformat the graphs. Figure 4.2, a chart showing shear thickening fluid response times, still had the font I used in graduate school, a font that NovaStride's branding guide explicitly forbade. He was presenting my academic soul as his corporate vision. I felt a wave of nausea, but I forced myself to keep clicking. I needed more. I needed to know how deep the rot went. I ran a search through the internal email archives. I had administrative privileges for technical audits, a clearance level Gregory had signed off on years ago and likely forgot to revoke. I searched for my own name. The results were illuminating. There were dozens of threads between Evan and the sales team, in one, sent 3 weeks ago. A sales director asked about the feasibility of the lattice structure. Evan's reply was casual, dismissive, and infuriating. Don't worry about the physics. It is just Ivy's matrix. We just have to get the nerd to make it real. Once the prototype holds together, we can scale it without her. I highlighted the sentence, get the nerd to make it real. I saved the email to my encrypted external drive. Then I found another one, dated 2 days prior to the boardroom meeting. Investors are asking about IP ownership. The CFO had written, "Are we clear on the patent landscape?" Evan's reply was immediate. Totally clear. Legal looked at it. We own everything fully. The staff signed standard assignment agreements years ago. It is a non-issue. He was lying. He was lying to the CFO. He was lying to the investors. And worst of all, he was lying to himself because he was too lazy to check the filing cabinet in HR. I heard footsteps behind me and quickly minimized the window. It was Mia, a junior engineer I had hired straight out of college 2 years ago. She looked nervous, clutching her tablet to her chest like a shield. "Ivy," she whispered, glancing toward the glass doors to ensure we were alone. "Can I talk to you?" I swiveled my chair. "Of course, Mia." "What is it?" She pulled up a chair and lowered her voice. "I was in the break room earlier. Evan was there with the marketing lead. They didn't see me behind the vending machine." She paused, looking terrified of being the bearer of bad news. "Ivy. He is talking about spinning PulseGuard out. He wants to create a separate subsidiary, Novastride would be the parent company, but the new entity would hold the product license. He is going to name himself CEO of the new spin-off. I nodded slowly. It made sense. It was the classic play. Isolate the high-value asset, detach it from the legacy debt of the main company, and take it public to make a fortune. Did he say anything else, I asked? Mia bit her lip. He said the current engineering team is legacy overhead. He said you are just here to validate his vision, and once the tooling is done, they can outsource the maintenance to a firm in Vietnam. I reached out and patted Mia's arm. Thank you for telling me. Mia, don't worry. Just keep your head down and do your work. When she left, I went back to the search bar. I typed in subsidiary and transition, and there it was, a draft proposal titled Project Razor. It was a roadmap for the restructuring. On page 14, under the heading Personnel Strategy, there was a bullet point that made my blood run cold. All intellectual property, including pre-employment assets utilized in PulseGuard, to be formally assigned to NewCo. Legacy staff like Flores will be transitioned out post-launch following a 6-month knowledge transfer period. He wasn't just stealing my work. He was planning to fire me the moment he squeezed the last drop of expertise out of my brain. My phone rang. It was HR. Can you come up to the 4th floor? Ivy. We need to discuss your compensation package for the upcoming quarter. The timing was impeccable. I walked into the HR office 10 minutes later. Sitting there was a manager I barely knew, a woman named Sarah, and the VP of Operations. They looked uncomfortable. Ivy, thanks for coming in. Sarah started, shuffling papers. We are looking at the budget for the PulseGuard rollout. It is a capital-intensive phase. Because of the high overhead, we have to restructure the bonus plan. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. We are moving your role to a fixed stipend for technical support. It is a flat fee of $5,000 per quarter, in addition to your base salary. However, this replaces the profit-sharing points you were eligible for under the old RD structure. I looked at the paper. $5,000. They were offering me $5,000 for a product Evan claimed was worth 9 figures. This seems like a significant reduction, I said, keeping my voice flat. Given that the product is based on my materials research, the VP of Operations sighed, looking bored. Look, Ivy, we all value your contribution. But the reality is that the value is in the marketing and the business strategy. That is where the risk is being taken. Evan is out there securing millions in funding. We need to incentivize the rainmakers, Sarah chimed in, trying to be helpful but only making it worse. And honestly, Ivy, we reviewed your file. Evan mentioned that you don't really understand the business side of things. He said you signed whatever we gave you years ago because you just wanted to work in a lab. We are trying to be fair here given the budget constraints. She signed whatever we gave her. A bubble of laughter almost escaped my throat. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop it. It was such a perfect, arrogant assumption. They thought I was a desperate charity case who was just happy to be in the building. I see, I said. Standing up, I pushed the paper back toward them. I need to think about this. We need a signature by Friday, the VP said sharply. Or we will have to reevaluate your position entirely. I walked out of the building that evening with my head held high, but my mind was racing. I did not go to the gym. I did not go to the grocery store. I went straight to my apartment and cleared off my kitchen table. I opened my bag and took out the physical copies of the documents I had been gathering. First, the original patent, granted 7 years ago, U.S. Patent number 894201, Adaptive Polymer Lattice for Kinetic Energy Dissipation, Inventor Ivy Flores. Next to it, I laid down my employment contract from 5 years ago. I flipped to Exhibit A, the carve-out sheet. It was explicit. Employee retains all rights to patent 894201 and any derivative works created prior to employment. Then, I placed the printout of Evan's Project Razor proposal, the plan to steal my IP. Finally, I added the email where he called me a nerd and claimed they owned everything. I stood back and looked at the table. It was a map of a crime. Evan Hale was not just an arrogant rich kid who had insulted me. He was a builder constructing a skyscraper on a foundation that did not belong to him. He had gone to investors. He had promised them ownership of a technology that was legally mine. He had built his entire reputation, his future IPO, and his 9-figure valuation on a patent that was sitting in my name at the United States Patent and Trademark Office. He had assumed I was weak. He had assumed I was stupid. He had assumed that because I went to a state school and drove a 10-year-old Honda, I wouldn't know how to protect myself. I looked at the documents under the harsh light of my kitchen chandelier. The fear I had felt earlier, the fear of being fired, of being marginalized, began to dissolve. In its place, something harder and sharper took hold. Evan Hale wanted a war. He wanted to erase me. He wanted to take my life's work and put his name on the cover. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of the small legal clinic that had helped me file the patent all those years ago. It was late, but I knew the voicemail would be there. He was too arrogant to know it yet, but he had just handed me the weapon that would end him, and I was going to make sure that when he finally realized what was happening, it would be far too late to fix it. The invitation for the mandatory strategy sync landed in the inbox of every department head on the 4th floor at exactly 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. Every inbox, that is, except mine. I watched through the glass wall of my lab as the marketing director, the CFO, and the head of sales all migrated toward the main conference room like a school of expensive fish. They were carrying leather-bound notebooks and tablets, buzzing with the kind of energy that only precedes a massive public announcement. I waited 5 minutes, then I grabbed my own notebook and followed them. When I walked into the conference room, the air was already thick with the smell of premium coffee and ambition. Evan Hale stood at the head of the table, flanked by 2 junior associates who looked like they had been cloned in a business school basement. On the screen behind him was a timeline titled Road to the Summit. Evan paused mid-sentence when he saw me. The room went quiet. It was not the silence of respect. It was the silence of people waiting for a car crash. "Ivy," Evan said, his voice dripping with a fake, sugary politeness that was worse than shouting. "I think there has been a mix-up. This session is for core leadership only. We are discussing high-level capital strategy for the Investor Summit." I stood my ground near the door, keeping my face impassive. "I understand that, Evan, but since the timeline includes the final technical validation of the lattice structure, I assumed you would need the lead engineer present to confirm the feasibility dates. You have the prototype shipment scheduled for 3 weeks from now. That is aggressive." Evan sighed, a long theatrical exhale that signaled to everyone in the room that I was being difficult. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Listen, Ivy," he said, dropping the politeness. "We are past the science project phase. We do not need a lecture on polymers right now. We need people who can speak the language of capital. This meeting is about valuation and narrative. Unless you have an MBA hidden in that lab coat, you are just going to slow us down." He gestured vaguely toward the door. "We will send you a summary." The dismissal was absolute. I turned and walked out, feeling the eyes of my colleagues burning into my back. They looked away as I passed, studying their shoes or their phones. I was radioactive. Evan had successfully branded me as the help, a necessary nuisance that had outlived its usefulness. If I thought that was the bottom, I was wrong. 2 days later, I arrived at work to find 2 men from facilities standing in my lab. They were unplugging my workstation, my personal photos, a picture of my parents, a framed copy of my first patent approval were already in a cardboard box. "Excuse me," I said, dropping my bag. "What is going on?" One of the men looked apologetic. "Work order came down from Mr. Hale. Ma'am, he said they need this space for the new video production team. They are filming the promo spots for the summit here. Lighting requirements, apparently." "And where am I going?" I asked, my voice trembling with a rage I could barely suppress. He pointed toward the back of the hallway, near the server closets. "Room 4B. Room 4B was not an office. It was a converted storage room with no windows and a ventilation vent that rattled constantly. It was half the size of my lab office. By the time I had set up my computer, the message was clear. I had been physically erased from the company's visible hierarchy. I was no longer the scientist behind the glass wall. I was a ghost in the machine, tucked away where investors would never see me. That afternoon, Evan's assistant summoned me to his office. It was not a request. Evan was sitting behind his desk, which was cluttered with prototype casings, my casings. He did not stand up when I entered. He gestured to a low chair on the other side of the desk, forcing me to look up at him. "Ivy, have a seat," he said, not looking up from his phone. "We need to talk about the transition." "Transition?" I asked, keeping my hands folded in my lap. "Yes." He finally set the phone down and leaned back, clasping his hands behind his head. "Look, PulseGuard is moving into the big leagues. We are talking global distribution. To handle that scale, I have decided to bring in a Tier 1 RD firm to handle the next phase of development. They are based in Zurich. They have the pedigree we need to reassure the institutional investors." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. "You are outsourcing the core technology. I'm upgrading the team," he corrected, a smirk playing on his lips. "Which brings me to you. We are shifting your role, effective immediately. You will be moving to legacy support. We need someone to maintain the documentation for the old industrial helmet line. It is steady work, less pressure." He said it as if he were doing me a favor, as if he were tossing scraps to a stray dog. "Evan," I said slowly, carefully choosing my words, "PulseGuard is built entirely on the adaptive matrix I designed. My name is on the internal patents. My offer letter 5 years ago included specific carve-outs regarding my pre-existing intellectual property. If you outsource this, or if you try to transfer the ownership to a subsidiary, you are going to run into significant legal hurdles." Evan laughed. It was a genuine, amused sound. He waved his hand in the air as if swatting away a fly. "Oh, Ivy, you are still hung up on that." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. His eyes were hard and bright with arrogance. "Listen to me. Those templates you signed, they are boilerplate. Our attorneys cleaned that up years ago. I had legal do a full audit before I even pitched this to my father. Everything you have done, every thought you have had in this building, is Novastride property now. That is how the real world works. But I started." He cut me off. "Stop. Just stop. You are embarrassing yourself. You think because you tweaked some formulas in grad school that you own a $100 million product. People with degrees like yours are a dime a dozen. Ivy, you are a technician. A good one. Sure, but a technician. You should be grateful I'm letting you stand in the shadow of big deals instead of firing you for trying to ruin them with petty paperwork." He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick document. He slid it across the desk toward me. "However," he continued, his voice smoothing out into a practiced corporate drone, "my father has a soft spot for long-term employees. So, I am offering you this." I looked down at the document. It was titled, "Revised Employment and Proprietary Information Agreement." I flipped it open. The terms were brutal. It offered me a grant of 500 stock options that would vest over 4 years and were currently worthless in exchange for a complete, retroactive assignment of all intellectual property, past, present, and future. Regardless of origin, it specifically referenced any and all prior inventions and sought to nullify any previous agreements. It was a trap. If they really owned everything like he claimed, they would not need me to sign this. This document was a confession. It was proof that their lawyers had looked at my file, seen the carve-out, and panicked. They needed me to sign my rights away before the investor summit. I looked up at Evan. He was watching me expectantly, like a fisherman waiting for the bobber to sink. "This is comprehensive," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "It is a standard cleanup," Evan said, shrugging. "Just crossing the T's, sign it, and you get the stock. Plus, you get to keep your job. Don't sign it, and well, we will have to discuss whether you are a cultural fit for the future of Novastride." My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I knew exactly what this was. He was trying to bully me into signing over a fortune for pennies. He was betting on my fear. He was betting that the girl from the state school would be too intimidated by the CEO's son to read the fine print. I closed the folder and placed my hand on top of it. "I need to review this," I said quietly. "It is a legal document. I cannot sign it right now." Evan rolled his eyes. "Seriously, it is standard language." "Ivy, I understand," I said, standing up and picking up the folder. "But I need to sleep on it. I want to make sure I understand the vesting schedule for the options." I forced a small, hesitant smile. A smile that said I was considering it. A smile that said I was bending. Evan bought it. He leaned back in his chair. Satisfied. "Fine, take it home, but I want it on my desk by 9 tomorrow morning. And Ivy, do not make me regret keeping you around. No one else is ever going to value your work like this." I walked out of his office, clutching the document to my chest. I walked past the open workspace, past the glass lab I used to work in, and into the elevator. I did not cry. I did not shake. The sting of his words dime a dozen. Shadow of big deals was still burning on my skin. But beneath the pain, there was a cold, crystalline clarity. Evan Hale had just committed his arrogance to paper. He had handed me the evidence that he knew his claim to the patent was weak. He had threatened my job if I did not sign away my rights. It was coercion. It was extortion. And it was all documented in the 40-page contract I was holding. I drove home in silence. When I got to my apartment, I did not turn on the lights. I sat at my kitchen table and scanned every single page of the agreement into my laptop. Then, I opened my email. I typed in the address of Lila Grant, the IP attorney who had helped me all those years ago. I attached the scan of the new contract. I attached the recording of the meeting I had secretly made on my phone legal in our one-party consent state. I typed a single subject line. "I think it is time." I hit send. Evan wanted me to speak the language of capital fine. I was about to teach him that the most expensive dialect in the world is the one spoken by a patent lawyer with a smoking gun. Lila Grant's office smelled of old paper and expensive lemon furniture polish. It was a far cry from the cramped strip mall unit where we had first met 7 years ago. Back when I was a graduate student counting pennies, and she was a solo practitioner hungry for cases. Now, she was a partner at a boutique intellectual property firm. The kind of place that had a receptionist who offered you sparkling water and a view of the skyline that rivaled Evan Hale's. But Lila herself had not changed. She was still sharp, still terrifyingly focused, and still the only person I trusted to read the fine print of my life. I sat across from her at a mahogany desk, watching her read. She had my original employment contract in her left hand, and the insulting revised agreement Evan had slid across his desk in her right. She had been reading in silence for 10 minutes. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner and the occasional scratch of her pen as she circled something in red ink. Finally, she looked up. Her eyebrows were raised so high they almost vanished beneath her bangs. "Ivy," she said, her voice calm but laced with disbelief. "Did Gregory Hale actually read Exhibit A before he signed this 5 years ago?" "No," I replied, taking a sip of the water. He was in a rush to get the department staffing numbers up for a quarterly review. He told me to just sign it so he could get to lunch. Lila let out a low whistle. She set the documents down and leaned forward, interlacing her fingers. "You have to understand something. Usually, these carve-outs are weak. Companies write them to be intentionally vague so they can claim ownership of anything you think about while you are on their payroll. But this is ironclad." She tapped the original contract with a manicured fingernail. "We put a clause in here stating that not only do you retain ownership of patent 894201, but you also retain rights to any future inventions substantially derived from that foundational research, unless there is a specific, separate written assignment and compensation event." She looked at me intensely. "Has there ever been a separate assignment? Did they ever pay you a lump sum to buy the rights to the Pulse Guard adaptations?" "Never," I said. "I got my standard salary. I got a standard holiday bonus, but nothing for the IP." "Then they are in trouble," Lila said, a small, predatory smile touching her lips. She opened her laptop and pulled up the United States Patent and Trademark Office database. She typed in a few queries, her eyes scanning the results. I checked before you got here. She continued, Novastride has no assignment recorded for your patent family. As far as the federal government is concerned, you are the sole owner. And based on the technical specs you sent me for PulseGuard, that device practices at least 4 of your independent claims. She spun the laptop around to show me. It was a side-by-side comparison she had mocked up. On the left was my patent diagram from graduate school showing the lattice structure. On the right was the technical schematic Evan had included in his investor deck. They were identical. The only difference was that Evan had colored his version blue. This is infringement, Lila said flatly. It is willful, direct infringement. And because Evan is the one pushing this as the flagship product, he has exposed the company to treble damages. If we sued them today, we could likely get an injunction to stop every single shipment of PulseGuard from leaving the warehouse. My heart skipped a beat. An injunction. That would kill the company. It would destroy the investor summit, tank the stock price, and likely bankrupt the division. I do not want to burn the whole place down. Lila, I said, shifting in my chair. There are good people working there. My team Mia. The other engineers, they rely on those paychecks. I just want credit. I want fair compensation. I want Evan to stop treating me like I am invisible. Lila sighed, taking off her glasses and cleaning them with a silk cloth. She looked at me with a pitying expression, the kind a veteran soldier gives a raw recruit. Ivy, I know you want to be the bigger person, but you need to look at this document Evan gave you yesterday. She held up the revised employment agreement Evan had tried to bully me into signing. This is not a contract. Ivy, this is a panic move. See this clause here? It attempts to retroactively assign all prior IP to the company, and here it tries to supersede the original offer letter. Evan knows he does not own the patent. His lawyers know it. That is why they are trying to scare you into signing this for 500 shares of stock that might be worth nothing if the IPO fails. She leaned across the desk. If you sign this, you lose everything. If you do not sign it, they will fire you. They are already pushing you into a closet office. They are preparing to cut you loose. I felt a cold chill settle in my stomach. I knew she was right. I had seen the Project Razor memo. So what do we do? I asked. We prepare for war. But we do it quietly. Lila said, we need to build a fortress around your intellectual property so that when they try to fire you, they realize they are firing the landlord of their own building. For the next 2 hours, we worked. We turned Lila's office into a war room. We mapped out a digital paper trail that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. I pulled up the archived emails on my secure drive. We found the thread where Evan explicitly referred to the core technology as Ivy's Matrix. We found the time-stamped metadata on the original CAD files showing my user ID as the creator 3 years before Evan was even hired. We found the calendar invites for the lunch and learn sessions, where I taught the rest of the engineering team how the lattice absorbed impact sessions Evan had skipped because he was at a golf outing. Lila cataloged everything. She created a timeline that proved Novastride had knowingly built their product on my technology without securing the rights. This is good, she said, organizing the stack of evidence. But we need one more layer of protection. Right now, the patent is in your personal name. That makes you vulnerable. If they sue you, they can go after your personal assets, drag you through depositions, and try to bleed you dry with legal fees until you fold. She pulled a fresh file from her drawer. We are going to form a limited liability company, a holding company. We will transfer the patent portfolio into it immediately. That way, you are not just an angry ex-employee. You are the CEO of a rival entity negotiating a business-to-business licensing deal. It changes the dynamic completely. I nodded. Do it. We settled on the name right there. Flores Impact Systems. It sounded strong. It sounded real. Lila drafted the articles of incorporation and the assignment of patent rights. I signed the papers with a pen that felt heavier than usual, with a few strokes of ink. I ceased to be just Ivy Flores, the overlooked employee in room 4B. I became the sole proprietor of the technology that Novastride's future depended on. Okay, Lila said, closing the file. Here is the strategy. You go back to work tomorrow. You do not sign Evan's new agreement. You tell him you are still reviewing it with your financial advisor. You stall. Meanwhile, you continue to do your job. Be helpful. Be indispensable. And document every single time Evan takes credit for your work. What happens when he pushes back? I asked. Let him push, Lila said, her eyes hard. Let him launch the product. Let him stand on that stage at the investor summit. Let him brag to the world about how much money this technology is going to make. The more value he publicly assigns to PulseGuard, the bigger the check he is going to have to write you when we drop the hammer. She walked me to the elevator. As the doors opened, she put a hand on my shoulder. Remember, Ivy, they do not see you. They see a line item in a budget. They see a problem to be managed. They have no idea that you are holding the detonator. Do not give them a reason to look down until you are ready. I walked out of the building and into the cool evening air. The city lights were blinking on, a grid of electricity and ambition. For the first time in months, the crushing weight on my chest was gone. I hailed a cab, not because I couldn't walk to the subway, but because I felt different. I sat in the back seat and watched the city blur past. I thought about Evan Hale in his corner office, probably laughing with his friends about how he had put the state schoolgirl in her place. I thought about Gregory Hale, too busy to read the contracts he signed. They thought they were playing chess, but they did not even know the rules. They thought I was a pawn. They did not realize that a pawn that makes it to the other side of the board becomes a queen. I checked my phone. There was an email from Evan, marked high priority, Ivy. I need that signature first thing in the morning. Do not make this difficult. I typed a reply, my thumbs moving quickly over the screen. Evan, noted, I am running the final language past my advisor. We'll have an update for you shortly. It was polite. It was professional. And it was the last time I would ever let him think he had the upper hand. I put the phone away and looked out the window, watching my reflection in the glass. I looked the same as I had yesterday, but I knew better. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was Flores Impact Systems, and business was about to pick up. The art of setting a trap is not just about digging the hole. It is about convincing the wolf that the hole is actually a shortcut to exactly where he wants to go. For the next 3 weeks, I became the most helpful, compliant, and dedicated employee at Novastride Dynamics. I stopped arguing in meetings. I stopped asking about credit. I stopped glaring at Evan when he interrupted me. Instead, I played the role he wanted me to play, the subdued technician who had finally accepted her place in the hierarchy and was just grateful to be along for the ride. I walked into Evan's office on a Tuesday morning, carrying a tablet and a coffee. He was staring at a mood board for the marketing campaign, looking stressed. Evan, I said, keeping my voice light and professional, I have been looking at the final material specification sheets for the Investor Summit prototypes. I think we can tighten the tolerances on the polymer lattice. It will make the device feel more premium in the hand. If we are going to pitch this as a luxury safety item, it needs to feel substantial. Evan looked at me, surprised. He had expected me to come in with a grievance or a resignation letter. You want to improve the build quality, he asked. Suspicious. I want my stock options to be worth something. I lied smoothly. If PulseGuard is the unicorn you say it is, I want to make sure the product doesn't fail during the live demo. He relaxed instantly. Greed was a motivation he understood. He smiled, a smug, self-satisfied expression that made my skin crawl. That is the spirit. Ivy, I knew you would come around. Do whatever you need to do. Just make it bulletproof. Make it bulletproof. It was a poor choice of words. Considering what I was about to do, I went back to my cramped office in room 4B and pulled up the master design files. This was the most critical part of the operation. My patent, the one now safely housed within Flores Impact Systems, had very specific claims. It covered a self-adjusting polymer matrix with a variable viscosity response between 40 and 60 degrees Celsius. The current prototype was sitting at the edge of that range. It used a generic blend that was almost my invention, but arguably just different enough that a very expensive lawyer might be able to argue it was a distinct iteration in court. I was not going to give them that chance. I opened the material specs and adjusted the chemical composition. I narrowed the operational range. I tweaked the lattice geometry so that it aligned perfectly, mathematically, and undeniably with Claim 4 and Claim 7 of my patent. By the time I was done, PulseGuard was no longer just similar to my invention. It was a textbook definition of it. I framed every change as an efficiency upgrade. I sent an email to the manufacturing team, copying Evan, stating that these adjustments would reduce curing time by 12% and simplify the molding process. Evan approved it without reading the technical attachments. He just saw reduce time and hit reply with a single word, approved. I saved that email. I printed it. I backed it up to 3 different cloud servers. He had just authorized the direct infringement of my intellectual property in writing. The following week, the pressure from procurement began to mount. We were in a review meeting with the operations team. Marcus, the head of procurement, was sweating over a spreadsheet. Evan, the cost of this custom polymer is eating into our margins, Marcus said, tapping his pen on the table. We have a vendor in Ohio who says they can supply a standard impact foam for 30% less. It is not adaptive, but it passes the minimum safety certification. I sat up straight. This was the pivot point. If they switched to generic foam, they would have an inferior product, but they wouldn't be infringing on my patent. I needed them to stay on the hook. I cleared my throat. Marcus, I understand the cost concern, but the standard foam requires a thicker casing to meet the impact rating. If we switch now, we have to redesign the injection molds. I turned to Evan, locking eyes with him. That is a 6-week delay on tooling. We would miss the investor summit entirely. Evan's face went pale. The summit was his coronation. He could not miss it. Absolutely not. Evan snapped, slamming his hand on the table. We are not delaying the launch. Time to market is everything. We stick with the adaptive lattice. But the cost, Marcus tried to argue. I don't care about the cost, Evan shouted. We are selling a premium solution. We are selling the Hale safety standard. We stick with the current design. Ivy says it works, so we use it. I lowered my head to hide the small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. He had just defended his right to steal from me with more passion than he had ever shown for the actual work. Later that afternoon, I had a Teams call with Evan to finalize the demo units. I was in my office, the door locked. I hit the record button on the screen. Illinois was a 2-party consent state, but NovaStride's employee handbook, which I had read cover to cover explicitly, stated that all internal communications and video conferences are subject to recording for quality assurance and compliance purposes. By logging into the corporate server, he had already consented. Evan, I said, looking at his pixelated face, I just want to confirm that you are happy with the performance of the matrix. The impact absorption is holding steady at 99%. Yeah, it is great, Evan said, clearly distracted by something on his other screen. Honestly, Ivy, I have to hand it to you. You actually figured out the matrix thing. I did not think that lattice structure would hold up, but it is solid. You acknowledge that the lattice structure is the key to the performance I asked, pressing gently. Obviously, he said, sounding bored. It is the engine of the whole thing. Without that matrix, it is just a plastic watch. Look, I have to jump on a call with Goldman Sachs. Just keep the units coming. The call ended. I stopped the recording. It is the engine of the whole thing. He had just admitted that my invention was the essential component of the product. In patent law, that was the difference between a nuisance lawsuit and a fatal blow. While I was tightening the noose inside the building, Lila was reinforcing the gallows from the outside. She filed 3 continuation patents that week, expanding the scope of my original claims to cover the specific manufacturing methods Evan was now using. She also filed international applications under the Patent Cooperation Treaty, ensuring that if NovaStride tried to move production to China or Germany to avoid U.S. laws, my rights would follow them. We were building a cage, bar by bar, and Evan was walking right into it. HR tried to corner me on the contract again on a Thursday. I was walking to the break room when the VP of HR stepped out of her office. Ivy, we still do not have that signed agreement, she said, her voice tight. Evan is asking for it daily. We need to get this processed before the stock grant cycle closes. I put on my best apologetic face. I am so sorry. Linda, my financial advisor is terribly slow. He is reviewing the tax implications of the stock vesting schedule. You know how accountants are. I just want to make sure I don't get hit with a huge bill next April. I laughed nervously. Linda sighed. She was overworked and tired of Evan's constant demands. Just get it to me by Monday. Okay, I can hold him off for the weekend. But he is getting impatient. I promise. I said I had no intention of signing it by Monday, or ever. But every day I stalled was another day the product became more entrenched in their supply chain. That night, I sat on my couch with a glass of wine and opened my laptop. I logged into LinkedIn for 5 years. My headline had read, Senior Materials Engineer at Novastride Dynamics. I clicked the edit pencil. I deleted the title. In its place, I typed, Inventor of Adaptive Impact Response Matrix Technology. I did not tag Novastride. I did not mention PulseGuard. I simply staked my claim to the science. It was a subtle move, a digital flag planted in the ground. If anyone looked closely, any due diligence officer, any curious investor, they would see a discrepancy. But Evan wasn't looking closely. Evan was looking at himself. 2 weeks passed. The final prototypes rolled off the line. They were sleek, black, and terrifyingly effective. They worked perfectly because I had ensured they were built exactly to my specifications. Evan began his victory lap before the race had even finished. He posted a photo on Instagram of himself holding the device, standing in front of the Novastride logo. The caption read, True innovation requires the courage to see what others cannot. So proud to unveil PulseGuard to the world next week. This is what happens when you refuse to compromise on a vision. Future of Safety Tech CEO Game Changer. He tagged 3 major tech influencers and a venture capital fund. I refreshed the page an hour later, 500 likes, comments from investors saying, Can't wait to see the numbers and Novastride is back. I watched the engagement numbers climb. Every like, every share, every article that speculated on the 9-figure potential of the device was adding zeros to the settlement check he would eventually have to write. He was inflating a balloon, puffing it full of ego and promises and other people's money. He had no idea that I was standing right behind him, holding a very sharp needle. I took a screenshot of his post. I dragged it into the folder labeled Evidence. Go ahead. Evan, I whispered to the empty room. Tell the world how valuable my property is. Make them believe it. Because when the music stops, I am going to be the only one with a chair. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel was draped in Novastride blue and silver. It smelled of expensive lilies and even more expensive ambition. Every surface that could hold a logo was plastered with the PulseGuard branding, and hanging above the main stage was a banner 10 feet tall featuring a portrait of Evan Hale looking thoughtfully into the middle distance. The caption underneath read, Evan Hale, the visionary behind the next generation of safety. I stood at the entrance, clutching my small black purse, feeling entirely out of place in a room full of tuxedos and designer gowns. I was wearing a simple navy dress I had bought off the rack 3 years ago for a cousin's wedding. When I checked in at the registration desk, the young woman typed my name into her tablet and frowned. Flores, she muttered, scrolling down. Ah, here we are. Table 42. She handed me a name tag. It did not say Senior Materials Engineer. It did not say Inventor. It just said Ivy Flores. Staff. Table 42 was in the back corner, wedged between the kitchen swing doors and the sound mixing board for the AV technicians. I was seated next to a freelance lighting guy named Dave, who was eating a bread roll with one hand and adjusting faders with the other. Far across the room, near the stage, sat the leadership table. I could see Gregory Hale laughing with a partner from a venture capital firm. Next to him was Evan, looking flushed and triumphant, holding a glass of champagne like it was a scepter. I sat down and poured myself a glass of water. I was not here to celebrate. I was here to witness the crime. The lights dimmed, and the music swelled a dramatic, orchestral track that sounded like it belonged in a superhero movie. A spotlight hit the stage, and Evan walked out to thunderous applause. He looked the part, I had to give him that. His suit was tailored to within an inch of its life. He hooked a thumb in his pocket and smiled that easy, practiced smile that rich men use to disarm people they intend to rob. "Welcome, everyone," Evan said, his voice booming through the surround sound system. "Tonight is not just about a product. It is about a promise that Nova Stride keeps to the workers of the world." He clicked a remote, and the screen behind him filled with a rotating 3D model of PulseGuard. It was the model I had refined. It was the lattice I had designed. It was the math I had bled over when we started this journey, Evan continued, pacing the stage. People told me it was impossible. They said the materials science just wasn't there. But at Nova Stride, we have a world-class innovation culture. We do not accept limitations. I pushed my brilliant team to look beyond the textbooks, to look beyond the conventional wisdom, and to find a way. He paused for effect, and we did. We built the impossible. He never mentioned my name. He never mentioned the engineering team. We were just a vague, faceless team that he had benevolently pushed to greatness. The presentation went on for 40 minutes. It was a masterclass in ego. By the time he reached the QA session, the room was eating out of his hand. A journalist from TechCrunch stood up near the front. "Evan, the response time on this polymer is incredible. Was this developed in-house, or did you collaborate with any academic institutions? It looks like advanced doctoral work." I stiffened in my chair. This was it. This was the moment he could pivot. Maybe mention the strong engineering talent he had hired. Evan laughed. A dismissive, boyish sound. He leaned against the podium. "Nothing fancy," he said, grinning. "Just good old-fashioned hard work and the right leadership. Honestly, you do not need a PhD when you have a real business degree. Sometimes the academics get too lost in the theory. We focused on execution." The room chuckled. I felt the insult land like a physical slap. He was mocking my degree, the degree I had worked 2 jobs to pay for in front of 500 people. He was telling them that his MBA was the reason the physics worked. Another hand went up. It was a partner from a major investment firm. "What about the IP moat?" the investor asked. "Is the technology proprietary? Do you own the patents outright?" Evan did not hesitate. He did not even blink. "We own it 100%, he declared. "We have a fortress of patents around this technology. There are no encumbrances, no licensing fees, nothing. It is pure Nova Stride property." He glanced down at his father, Gregory, who gave him a proud thumbs up. I felt a cold, hard satisfaction settle in my chest. He had just done it. He had made a material misrepresentation to investors in a public forum. It was securities fraud. It was patent infringement. And it was all being live-streamed. After the presentation, the room broke into chaos as waiters circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres. I stood up and made my way toward the bar, needing to be closer to the center of the room for what came next. Evan was holding court near the ice sculpture, surrounded by a group of junior executives and hangers-on. He had his jacket off, his tie loosened, and his face was shiny with sweat and adrenaline. He was already on his 3rd drink. I tried to slip past them, but Evan saw me. His eyes lit up with a cruel sort of amusement. "Ivy," he shouted, waving me over. "Come here." The group parted, and I found myself standing in the center of the circle. Evan draped a heavy arm around my shoulder. He smelled of scotch and expensive cologne. "Everyone, this is Ivy," he announced, slurring slightly. "She is the one who crunched the numbers for me, the best calculator on legs we have got." The group laughed. I stood rigid, staring straight ahead. Evan looked down at me, his grin widening. "You look nice, Ivy. See, I told you we would get you to the big leagues. Who knew a little state school could produce someone who can copy a decent formula? Right?" The disrespect was breathtaking. He was erasing my invention and calling me a copycat in the same breath. I reached into my clutch purse and pressed the record button on my phone. I needed him to say it one more time. "It is a complex formula." "Evan," I said quietly, "the lattice structure is unique." Yeah. The lattice," Evan said, waving his glass and spilling a little champagne on the carpet. "It is brilliant, And now it is mine. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for everyone in the circle to hear. You should watch closely tonight. Ivy, take a picture. Because this is the closest you will ever get to seeing your work on a NASDAQ screen. You are a good support player. But tonight is for the stars. He patted my cheek twice, hard enough to sting, and then turned back to his friends, bursting into laughter at some joke I didn't hear. I stood there for a second, watching him. He looked so powerful. He looked untouchable. He had no idea that he was already a dead man walking. I turned and walked away. I did not go back to table 42. I walked past the leadership table, past the smiling investors, and pushed open the heavy glass doors that led to the balcony. The night air was freezing, a sharp contrast to the stifling heat of the ballroom. The city noise was muffled down here, just the distant hum of traffic. I walked to the railing and looked out at the skyline. I pulled my phone out of my purse. I stopped the recording. Then I opened my email app. I had a draft saved. It was addressed to Gregory Hale, the entire board of directors, and the general counsel of Novastride Dynamics. I had BCC'd Lila Grant. The subject line was in all caps, notice of patent infringement, and cease and desist demand. My hands were not shaking. I felt incredibly calm. I attached the PDF of my original patent, United States Patent Number 894201. I attached the PDF of my employment contract, with Exhibit A, the carve-out clause highlighted in neon yellow. I attached the formal letter from Flores Impact Systems, signed by Lila, which stated that Novastride was in direct violation of federal patent law and demanded an immediate halt to all marketing, sales, and distribution of PulseGuard. I typed a short message in the body of the email. Dear Gregory and Board, tonight, your head of innovation publicly claimed ownership of intellectual property that belongs to Flores Impact Systems. As the attached documents prove, Novastride has no rights to the adaptive matrix technology used in PulseGuard. You have been selling a product you do not own. Please consider this formal notice. If the launch is not halted immediately, we will file for an emergency injunction in federal court tomorrow morning. Regards, Ivy Flores, CEO, Flores Impact Systems. I looked through the glass doors. Inside, the lights were flashing, and the crowd was roaring as a demo video played on the giant screen. Evan was high-fiving the VP of Sales. He looked like he owned the world. I pressed send. The email swooshed away. I took a deep breath of the cold air. It was done. The bomb was in the room. It would take a few minutes for the phones to start buzzing. It would take a few minutes for the general counsel to choke on his appetizer. I leaned against the railing and waited. I wasn't a support player anymore. I was the one pulling the plug. And as the first frantic vibration of a phone buzzed in the pocket of the general counsel inside, I finally allowed myself to smile. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who had just cashed a check that Evan Hale couldn't afford to pay. The morning after you detonate a bomb, the silence is usually the loudest part. I walked into the Novastride lobby at 8:30 sharp. The air in the building was different. Usually, the office hummed with the low-frequency buzz of caffeine and ambition, but today, it felt brittle. Groups of employees were huddled in the glass-walled conference rooms, speaking in hushed tones. When they saw me coming, the conversations snapped shut. Eyes darted away. A junior developer I had mentored for 2 years suddenly found the pattern of the carpet fascinating as I passed his desk. They knew. They did not know the details, but they knew something massive had broken the previous night. The launch gala had ended early, the after-party had been canceled, and the rumor mill was churning out theories faster than the engineering team could debunk them. I did not even make it to my exiled office in room 4B. Before I could put my bag down, Gregory Hale's executive assistant intercepted me. She looked pale, her hands clutching a tablet like a shield. "Mr. Hale wants to see you immediately," she said, her voice tight. In the main boardroom, I nodded. I had expected this. I walked the long hallway to the executive suite. The last time I had been in this room, Evan had mocked my degree and Gregory had told me to be a good little helper. Today, the dynamic had shifted. Gregory was pacing at the head of the table. his face a mottled red that matched his tie. Evan was slumped in a chair to his right, looking hungover and sullen, wearing the same suit from the night before, though the tie was missing. The company's in-house general counsel, a nervous man named Marcus, was sweating through his shirt. On the large video screen at the far end of the room was a man I did not recognize. He was sitting in a wood-paneled office, likely in New York or Chicago, and he radiated the kind of expensive calm that costs $1,000 an hour. This was the outside counsel, the cleaner. "Sit down," Gregory barked, not bothering with pleasantries. I sat. I placed my hands on the table, palms flat. I felt incredibly calm. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" Gregory demanded, slamming his hand on the polished wood. "Sending a cease and desist letter to your own employer threatening to sue us on the night of our biggest launch? This is sabotage, Ivy. Pure and simple sabotage." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "We gave you a career. We gave you a platform. And this is how you repay us, by trying to extort the company because you feel underappreciated." I waited for him to finish. I watched Evan, who was staring at me with a mixture of hatred and confusion. He still did not believe this was real. He still thought this was just an HR issue that could be shouted away. "I am not trying to extort anyone, Gregory," I said, my voice steady. "And I am not sabotaging anything. I am simply enforcing the terms of a legal agreement that you signed 5 years ago." I turned to the screen. The man on the video feed was flipping through a stack of papers, the documents I had emailed the night before. He had not said a word yet. Gregory snorted. "Agreement. You mean that little addendum you snuck past HR? That is meaningless. You are an employee. Everything you create on company time belongs to Nova Stride. That is standard industry practice. Usually." Yes, I agreed, but not in this case. I looked at the screen. "Sir, have you reviewed Exhibit A?" The outside attorney looked up. His eyes were cold and gray behind rimless glasses. "I have," he said. His voice was dry, like rustling paper, and Gregory demanded, looking at the screen, "Tell her. Sterling, tell her she has no leg to stand on." Sterling took a slow breath. He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Gregory," he said, his tone devoid of any comfort, "we have a problem." The room went dead silent. Evan sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" Gregory asked, his voice dropping an octave. Sterling held up the document. "The language in this carve-out is exceedingly specific. Ms. Flores retained full ownership of her graduate research, and crucially, any future work substantially derived from it. I have cross-referenced her patent claims with the technical schematics for PulseGuard." He paused, looking directly at the camera. "It is a match, Gregory. The product practices the patent, and because there is no subsequent assignment of rights on file, no purchase agreement, no licensing deal. Nova Stride technically has no legal right to manufacture, sell, or distribute this technology. That is insane." Evan exploded. He jumped up from his chair, knocking it backward. "She wrote that code here. She built those prototypes in my lab, using my electricity, on my payroll. It is my property, Evan. Sit down." "Marcus," the in-house counsel whispered urgently, but Evan was too far gone. He turned on me, his face twisted with ugly rage. "You are ungrateful. You are vindictive. That is what this is. You are just jealous because I took your little science project and turned it into a real business. You could never do what I do, so you are trying to tear it down. You are a thief." "Ivy." I looked at him. He was unraveling. He was a child who had been told for the first time that the toy did not belong to him. "I am not a thief. Evan," I said softly, "I am the landlord, and you have not paid your rent." I pulled my phone out of my pocket. "And as for your claim that this is your work," I continued, tapping the screen, "I think the courts will find your own words quite illuminating." I placed the phone in the center of the table and pressed play. The audio was crystal clear, the background noise of the gala clinking glasses. Laughter filled the boardroom. Then, Evan's voice cut through, loud and slurred. "Everyone, this is Ivy. She is the one who crunched the numbers for me. The best calculator on legs we have got. I watched the lawyers. Sterling on the screen winced visibly. Marcus closed his eyes and put his head in his hands. The recording continued. Who knew a little state school could produce someone who can copy a decent formula? Right? Evan's face went pale. He recognized the moment. Yeah, the lattice. It is brilliant. And now it is mine. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a tank. That was recorded last night, I said, addressing Sterling on the screen, in front of 5 witnesses. Not only does he admit that I am the source of the formula, but he explicitly characterizes my role as copying a formula he claims is his, while simultaneously admitting the lattice, my patented lattice, is brilliant. It establishes knowledge of the infringement. It establishes malice. And frankly, it establishes a hostile work environment based on educational background discrimination. Sterling cleared his throat. It was a wet, uncomfortable sound. Gregory, Sterling said, his voice sharp. That recording is catastrophic. If that plays in front of a jury, or worse, if it leaks to the press during an IP dispute, we are not just looking at patent damages, we are looking at a reputational nuke. Gregory sank into his chair. He looked 10 years older than he had 5 minutes ago. He looked from Evan to me, and finally, the reality of the situation seemed to pierce his denial. What do you want? Gregory asked. His voice was quiet, defeated. He waved a hand dismissively. You want a bonus? You want a payout? Fine, we can cut a check. How much? $500,000? $1 million? Just name the number so we can bury this and get the trucks moving. I shook my head slowly. You still do not understand. Gregory, this is not an HR negotiation. I am not an employee asking for a raise. I reached into my bag and pulled out a business card. It was fresh from the printer. I slid it across the black walnut table. Flores Impact Systems, Ivy Flores, CEO. I am the Chief Executive Officer of a separate legal entity that holds the exclusive rights to the technology you are trying to sell. I said, and right now, Flores Impact Systems is not interested in a settlement. We are interested in protecting our asset. Evan laughed. A desperate, jagged sound. You cannot be serious. You are going to start a company with what money? You are a nobody. I ignored him. As of this morning, I continued. Flores Impact Systems has executed an assignment of all relevant patents. I control the technology, I control who uses it, and I control who does not. Gregory rubbed his temples. So you are holding us hostage. I am conducting business. I corrected him. You built a skyscraper on land you did not buy. Now you have to deal with the owner. Sterling spoke up from the screen. Gregory, you need to listen to me very carefully. The lawyer leaned into the camera lens. Until we have a signed licensing agreement with Ms. Flores's entity, we are exposed. Every unit we ship is a separate act of infringement. Every marketing claim we make is potential fraud. Evans slammed his fist on the table again. We have orders to fill. The investors are expecting numbers on Monday. We cannot just stop. Sterling cut him off. His voice cold and absolute. Yes, you can. And you will, Gregory. As your outside counsel, I am advising you to immediately suspend all shipments of PulseGuard. You need to pull the marketing campaign. You need to scrub the website. You need to issue a hold on the warehouse. But Evan started. Shut up. Evan, Gregory roared. The CEO turned to his son, his eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen before. Just shut up. You said you handled this. You said legal cleared it. You said it was yours. Evan shrank back, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Gregory turned back to me. He looked tired. He looked like a man who realized he was bleeding out. If we stop shipments, the stock tanks, he whispered. The company might not survive the quarter. That sounds like a failure of leadership, I said. Standing up, I picked up my phone. I will have my attorney send over a term sheet for a potential licensing arrangement. I said, but the price has gone up significantly since yesterday. I turned to leave. Wait, Evan called out, his voice cracking. You cannot just walk out. You work for us. I stopped at the door and looked back. The room felt small now. The expensive table, the view, the suits, it all looked like a set for a play that had been canceled. "Actually," I said, "I think you will find my resignation letter in your inbox. It is effective immediately." I walked out of the boardroom. Behind me, I heard Gregory start to scream at his son, a raw, guttural sound of a legacy collapsing in real time. I walked past the staring employees, past the security desk, and out into the bright morning sunlight. I had no job. I had no salary. But for the first time in my life, I owned everything that mattered. And as I hailed a cab to take me to Lila's office, I knew that the real negotiation was just beginning. The silence that followed the cease and desist letter was short-lived. By Monday morning, the rumors had leaked from the boardroom to the break rooms, and from the break rooms to the blind items on industry blogs. By Tuesday, the silence was replaced by the ringing of telephones. The market reacts to uncertainty like a deer reacts to a snapping twig. It runs. Novastride's stock price dipped 4% in the first hour of trading. By Wednesday, when the company failed to issue a denial regarding the patent dispute, it fell another 8%. The sharks were not just circling anymore, they were taking bites out of the hull. On Thursday afternoon, I received a text message. It was not from Evan, and it was not from legal. It was from Gregory Hale's personal number. "Can we meet neutral ground? Just us?" No lawyers from my side. I showed the phone to Lila. She smiled. The sharp, satisfied smile of a hunter who sees the trap spring shut. "He is bleeding," she said. "Let us go finish it." We met at a law office in downtown Chicago, a neutral site that smelled of leather and old money. It was a stark contrast to the glass and steel pretension of Nova Stride. When we walked into the conference room, Gregory was already there. He was alone, for the first time in the 5 years I had known him. Gregory Hale looked his age. The bluster was gone. The perfectly tailored suit looked a little loose around the shoulders, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and angry investors. There was no Evan. There was no screaming. There was just a man sitting in front of a notepad that contained the grim arithmetic of his own failure. "Ivy," Gregory said, standing up to shake my hand. He did not squeeze it. His grip was limp. "Ms. Grant." We sat down. Lila placed a folder on the table. It was thin, but we all knew it weighed more than the entire Nova Stride portfolio. "Let us cut to the chase," Gregory said, his voice raspy. "We are exposed. I have 3 major institutional investors threatening to pull their capital if the PulseGuard launch is delayed past the quarter. I have manufacturing partners in Shenzhen demanding deposit guarantees because they heard the rumors about the injunction, and I have a warehouse full of inventory that I cannot legally ship across state lines." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for empathy that I no longer had. "We are dead in the water. Ivy, if we do not resolve this in 48 hours, Nova Stride misses its earnings guidance, and the stock will go into freefall. I am looking at a hostile takeover or bankruptcy within 6 months. I kept my face impassive. I appreciate your candor. Gregory?" Lila leaned forward, opening the folder. "Since we agree on the severity of the situation, here are the options available to Flores Impact Systems. Option 1. We proceed with the lawsuit. We will seek treble damages for willful infringement. Given the documented evidence of Evan's knowledge, we will win. It will take 2 years, but we will own the building by the time it is done." Gregory winced. Option 2. Lila continued. "We license the technology to Nova Stride, but given the bad faith demonstrated by your executive team, the royalty rate will be punitive. We are talking 15% of gross revenue, not net." Gregory opened his mouth to object, but Lila held up a hand. Option 3. We walk away. We license the patent exclusively to a competitor who is capable of respecting intellectual property rights. Gregory rubbed his face with both hands. He looked exhausted. "Look, Ivy," he said, turning to me. "I know Evan treated you poorly. I know I overlooked your contributions, but we are a family here. We can fix this." He slid a piece of paper across the table. "I am prepared to offer you a lump sum payment of $250,000 to assign the patent to Nova Stride. Plus, A promotion to Vice President of Material Science. You will have your own team. You will report directly to me. We can put this whole ugly mess behind us. I looked at the paper. $250,000. It was a lot of money. It was more money than my parents had made in 10 years. But it was also an insult. He was trying to buy a diamond for the price of glass. I slid the paper back to him without blinking. No, Gregory blinked. Ivy, be reasonable. That is $250,000. It is not about the money. Gregory, I said quietly, it is about the control. If I sell you this patent, Evan becomes my boss again. He takes the credit again, and in 6 months, when the heat dies down, I will be marginalized again. The culture of this company is the problem. You allowed your son to build a career on entitlement and theft. I will not sell my life's work to the people who tried to steal it. Then what do you want? Gregory asked, his voice rising in frustration. I want PulseGuard. I said, I want to spin the product line out. We create a new entity. Let us call it the Halo Safety Group for now. Flores Impact Systems will own 51% of the equity. Novastride will own 49%. Gregory stared at me. You want majority control, I want absolute control. I corrected. I will be the CEO of the new entity. I will control the board. Novastride will be a silent partner. You will get your share of the profits to keep your investors happy and save your stock price. But you will have no operational say in how the technology is developed or deployed. And one more thing, I added, leaning forward. Evan Hale will have no executive role, none. He will not be on the board. He will not be an officer. He will not even have a key card unless I authorize it. Gregory balked. He sat back, crossing his arms. I cannot do that. Ivy, Evan is my son. Yes, he made mistakes. He was overzealous. But this product is his baby too. He sold it. He built the brand. I cannot just cut him out of his own legacy. He did not build the legacy. Gregory. I said, my voice hardening. He built the marketing campaign. I built the engine. Gregory shook his head. It is too much. 51%. No executive role for Evan. The board will never approve it. We will take our chances in court. We can argue that the carve-out was ambiguous. We can drag this out for years. You do not have the war chest to fight us. Ivy, you are one person against a corporation. Lila smiled again. It was time for the kill shot. Actually, Gregory, she said smoothly, we have plenty of resources. She pulled a single sheet of paper from the bottom of her folder and placed it on top of the table. We received a term sheet yesterday morning from Irongate Safety. Gregory went pale. Irongate was Novastride's biggest rival. They were bigger, meaner, and they had been trying to crush Novastride for a decade. They have reviewed the patent portfolio, Lila said, tapping the paper. They are willing to license the technology exclusively. They are offering a 7-figure advance and a royalty structure that would make Ivy a very wealthy woman. They are also very interested in filing an immediate injunction against Novastride to clear the market for their own launch. I watched Gregory read the term sheet upside down. I saw the moment the fight left his body. If Irongate got the tech, Novastride was finished. PulseGuard was the only thing propping up their valuation. Without it, they were just a mid-sized company with declining revenue and a massive legal liability. He looked at the whiteboard where he had scribbled some rough numbers earlier. He looked at the empty chair next to him where his son should have been. If I agree to this, Gregory whispered, his voice barely audible, Novastride survives. Novastride keeps 49% of the profits. I said, you can tell your investors you secured a strategic partnership. You can tell them the supply chain is moving again. You save the company. You save your own job. Gregory closed his eyes. He sat there for a long minute, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound in the room. Finally, he picked up his pen. Okay, he said. Okay, you win. Lila slid the full agreement across the table. It was already drafted. She had known he would fold. Gregory signed it. His signature was shaky, a shadow of the bold autograph I had seen on my offer letter 5 years ago. As he pushed the document back to us, he looked at me with a mixture of resentment and grudging respect. You are tougher than you look. Ivy, I had to be, I replied. Lila checked the signatures and nodded to me. It was done. I owned the company. I owned the product. I was the majority shareholder. Oh, Gregory, I said, as he began to pack up his briefcase, there is one final detail, a small addendum regarding personnel. Gregory stopped, his hand hovering over his leather bag. What now? I want to clarify the clause regarding Evan. I said, I told you he would have no executive role, but I'm willing to offer him employment at the new entity. Gregory looked surprised. You are, yes, I said, but his employment will be at will, and it will be entirely at the discretion of the majority owner. That means me. I want that written into the bylaws. I continued. Evan Hale serves at the pleasure of Ivy Flores. If he wants a job, he works for me. If he steps out of line, if he disrespects a single member of my team, or if he tries to take credit for work he did not do, I can terminate him with cause, immediately, and he forfeits any residual equity. Gregory looked at me. He understood exactly what I was doing. I was not just firing his son, I was offering him a leash. Why? Gregory asked. Why keep him around? Because, I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt, he needs to learn that a business degree does not teach you how to build things, and I think it is time he started his education over. From the bottom, Gregory stared at me for a long moment, then, slowly, he nodded. He needs a job, Gregory said, his voice heavy with resignation. He is leveraged up to his eyeballs on this deal. He bought a house based on the IPO projection. If you cut him loose, he loses everything. Then he better be a good employee. I said. Gregory signed the addendum. We walked out of the law office into the afternoon sun. The city looked different now. It looked like something I could shape. I turned to Lila. Did we just buy a company for the price of a patent filing fee? I asked. Lila laughed. No, Ivy. You bought it for the price of your dignity over the last 5 years. Today, you just got the refund. I took a deep breath. I had the term sheet. I had the control. And tomorrow morning, I was going to walk into the office not as a support technician, but as the woman who signed the checks. And the first meeting I was going to schedule was with Evan Hale. 6 months is a lifetime in the technology sector. In that time, a company can rise from obscurity to a market leader, or it can crumble into dust because someone forgot to read the fine print. The new headquarters of Flores Impact Systems was located just 3 miles from the Nova Stride campus, but it felt like a different world. We did not have marble floors or fountains in the lobby. We did not have an executive dining room with a private chef. What we had was 20,000 square feet of open-plan laboratory space, the best testing equipment money could buy, and a sign on the front door that was etched in simple, unpretentious steel. I walked through the double doors at 7 in the morning. The air smelled of ozone and fresh coffee. My office was in the corner, but unlike Evan's old fortress of solitude, my walls were glass, and my door was always open. On the desk sat a nameplate that Lila had given me as a joke, but which I had kept. It read, Ivy Flores, CEO and Chief Scientist. Today was a significant day. We were formally announcing the strategic partnership with Nova Stride. The legal team had spent weeks wordsmithing the press release to make it sound like a happy marriage of equals. But anyone who understood corporate structure could see the truth. It was a hostage situation where the hostage was paying the captor a licensing fee. The press conference was held in a rented event space downtown. The room was packed. The same journalists who had fawned over Evan's vision half a year ago were now clamoring to ask me about the science. I stood at the podium, wearing a blazer that cost more than my entire wardrobe used to. To my left stood Gregory Hale. He was smiling, but it was a tight, pained expression, the look of a man who is trying very hard not to scream. We are thrilled, Gregory said into the microphone, his voice only shaking slightly. To enter this new chapter with Flores Impact Systems, this strategic licensing arrangement ensures that PulseGuard remains the market leader in industrial safety, powered by the breakthrough technology developed by Ms. Flores. He stepped back, and I stepped forward. The cameras flashed, a strobe light of validation. Thank you, Gregory, I said. My voice was steady. The partnership we are announcing today is about clarity. It is about recognizing that the most important asset in any tech company is not the marketing budget, but the intellectual property that underpins it. We are excited to license our adaptive matrix to NovaStride, ensuring that the workers who rely on this gear get the protection they deserve. A hand went up in the front row. It was the reporter from the Wall Street Journal. Ms. Flores, 6 months ago, you were an unknown engineer in the background of this product launch. Now you control the holding company that owns the patent. How does it feel to finally see your technology recognized? I looked out at the crowd. I saw the investors who had once ignored me. I saw the board members who had tried to buy me off with a bonus. I smiled. Ownership and respect matter more than titles. I said, for a long time, the industry has operated on the assumption that the people in the suits are the ones who drive innovation. But the truth is, innovation belongs to the people who actually build it. It belongs to the people who stay late to solve the equation. Today is just a correction of the record. The crowd murmured their approval. I glanced toward the side of the room. Standing near the emergency exit was a man in a gray, off-the-rack suit holding a clipboard. It was Evan Hale. He had been stripped of his title. There was no more head of innovation on his business card. His new title was Senior Product Liaison. It was a middle management role with no direct reports and no budget authority. His job, essentially, was to shuttle paperwork between NovaStride and my engineering team, ensuring that our specifications were being met. He looked tired. The shine was gone. He was taking notes furiously as I spoke, capturing my words so he could report back to a board that no longer trusted him. After the press conference, the room cleared out slowly. I stayed behind to answer a few final questions, and then retreated to the small green room behind the stage to gather my things. There was a knock on the door. It opened tentatively, and Evan walked in. He looked different without the armor of his arrogance. He looked younger, and much more ordinary. He stood by the door, unsure if he was allowed to fully enter the room where the boss was sitting. Ivy, he said, or Ms. Flores. I just wanted to say, the presentation went well. The investors seemed calmed down. Thank you. Evan, I said, not looking up from my phone. Make sure the minutes from the meeting are uploaded to the shared drive by 5 o'clock. He hesitated. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Look, he started, his voice quiet. I know things are tense, but I just wanted to say, I honestly did not know. I looked up. Did not know that the patents were yours, he said. He spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. No one told me. I just assumed the company owned everything inside the building. That is how it usually works. I did not mean to steal anything. I just thought it was part of the package. I stared at him. Even now, after losing everything, he was trying to plead incompetence as a defense. I stood up and walked over to him. He flinched slightly, as if expecting me to shout. Evan, you had a choice, I said, my voice low and hard. You are a grown man with a business degree. You could have read the contracts. You could have walked into the lab and asked me about the origin of the lattice. You could have listened when I tried to explain the stability issues in the boardroom instead of mocking me. He looked down at his shoes. Your ignorance was not just a legal oversight. Evan, I continued, it was moral. You assumed the company owned everything because you assumed you owned people like me. You looked at my degree, you looked at my background, and you decided I was a resource to be mined, not a person to be respected. That is why you are standing there with a clipboard, and I am standing here with the company. He swallowed hard. His face was flushed. I know, he whispered. I messed up. I walked back to my bag and pulled out a file. There is one more thing you should know. I said, Flores Impact Systems has 3 additional patents in development. They go far beyond PulseGuard. We are looking at adaptive armor for first responders and structural dampeners for earthquake retrofitting. Evan's eyes widened. He knew what that meant. It meant the revenue stream was just beginning. NovaStride will have access to these technologies, I said, but only as long as the leadership actually respects the engineers behind the breakthroughs. If I catch wind of one more instance of credit being stolen, or one more engineer being silenced, I pull the license. Evan nodded quickly. Understood, Absolutely. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. Is there a future for me in that world, he asked. I mean, really? Or am I just going to be a liaison forever? I looked at him. I could have fired him. I could have banned him from the building. But that would have been too easy. That depends on you, I said. I pointed to the clipboard in his hand. If you want a future here, you start at the bottom. No executive titles, no assistants, no family name passes. You learn the product specs. You sit in on the safety reviews. You answer to the engineers you used to sneer at. If you do the work, the real work, then maybe in a few years, you will earn a seat at the table. I saw the struggle in his eyes. He wanted to walk out. He wanted to tell me to go to hell, but he couldn't. His reputation was shattered. The investors who had once bought him drinks now crossed the street to avoid him. He had nowhere else to go. Okay, he said, his voice defeated but resigned. I will do the work. Good. I said, start by organizing the files for the audit next week. He nodded and slipped out of the room. I left the venue and drove back to the office. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the laboratory floor. The office was quiet. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving only the hum of the servers and the rhythmic cycling of the fatigue testing machines. I made a cup of coffee and walked to my desk. I sat down and looked at the wall opposite my chair. Hanging there, in a simple black frame, was my diploma from Midwest State University, the cheap degree, the coupon book college. It caught the last light of the day, glowing softly. Next to it were the framed patent certificates, 7 of them now. I took a sip of coffee and leaned back. I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had been fuel. But I didn't need fuel now. I had momentum. I had built something that couldn't be taken away by a smirk or a suit. I turned to look directly at you. If someone is mocking your education while standing on your work, don't argue with them. Do not scream. Do not make a scene. Just make sure your name is on the patent, and let competence handle the revenge. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below with your location and let me know what you thought of Ivy's journey. If you enjoyed seeing arrogance get crushed by competence, please make sure to subscribe to the Boss Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people around the world.